Hi, this is Myra with Boutique Paint. Last week I showed you that I was doing a sample board for this week's project, and I decided to use this color, which is DIY's Farm Fresh, and we're working on a hat box slash gift box. These are great for any type of gift giving that you want to do, and they're reusable, which makes them even better. And they'll be good, you know, for the holidays. Also, if you want to do a holiday gift box, you can also do, you know, a stackable. I've done several hat boxes over the years, but these come in, this is oval obviously, and they come nested 3 deep. I'm going to use the smaller. I hope that you can see this because it's kind of hard to tell if this is all in there or if it's all too close, but I'm going to use the smaller and the medium box for this project. But it's fun to use all 3 and nest them, or, you know, put them one on top of the other to make, you know, if you got like 3 gifts that you're giving. I did a wedding cake style, the first ones I did, which turned out really cute. Okay, so I painted this already once. Now we're gonna put the second layer on, and I am using the paint inlay. And I noticed that there was a kind of a natural swag right here. So what I'm gonna try to do is get that onto the front, and I want the flower down towards the bottom because the lid will sit on this down to about this point. So keep that in mind. Once you put your lid on, how is your design going to come out? So you could even take a pencil and pencil that on there so you know that it's, you know, where it's at. I just put a scratch mark. So it's that much. So I did the first coat of paint. I'm going to go ahead and do just the front. I'm going to work in sections with this. So I'm not trying to do too much and have it dry too quickly on me. As you saw in last week's video, if you saw it, you saw that my boards were drying pretty quick as it was. It depends on the material underneath, especially with DIY paint. It dries super quick. That being said, you can spray it down under normal circumstances with water and reactivate it. But it does dry quick depending, especially on what surface you're putting it on. This is paper, so it's very porous. It's going to soak it up. It's going to soak it up nice and good. Now, I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to try to get the lights. There's a bubble that's happening while I'm painting this, and that's okay. It will flatten back out most of the time. And if it doesn't, it's just part of the design. Okay, that should be nice and good. So I'm going to scoot this aside so I don't, oh, see how fast it's drying. So give a good coat of paint. If you think you're putting too much on, probably not necessarily. All right. So we're going to take the swag part of this. I'm going to kind of eyeball the center. I think there's my edge there. So we're going to spray it. Now that it's on there, we're going to spritz it with water. And basically what we're doing is we're activating the paint inlay, the paint on the paint inlay to stick to the paint we have on our surface here. We're going to set that aside. And then I'm going to do something here on the top. Get it nice and wet. You'll notice, especially with DIY paint, that from the color that you've painted it on versus the color that is it's going to dry as is quite different. And then if you use wax, some of the waxes with DIY will change the color also of what's happening. So keep that in mind in what you're doing. And then of course, if anything comes out a little too bright, you can always vintage it down with either a little bit of dark wax, excuse me, or the decrepit dust. Or if you want to lighten it up a little bit, you can use a little bit of the white decrepit dust if you want to give it kind of a little bit different look. Because I only did one coat of this, I am doing the sides at this time really quick because there's a little bit too much of the box showing through the original box. So now get this again. So if you don't want any of the box, the brown from the box, or if you're using a white box to show through, go ahead and do, you know, a good solid paint over it, whether it's 2 coats or 1 coat, and then do this process. So I'm going to use this big center rose area because I want it to be a little bit more intense. No, I want a lot of floral on this. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm just gonna smooth this out. You can use the brayer also to smooth out. You can, once you spray it, you can use the brayer, you can use a paper towel, you can use your hands, but basically you're just wanting to make sure that, you know, it's connecting to your paint underneath. A lot of times I'll take a paper towel and just kind of push. Nice thing about the paper towel is it does absorb a little bit of the water, which should help a little bit in the drying time. So we're going to spray down. Now that this is dried, we're going to respray it, which activates it so you can lift it, then lay off the piece you're working on. And just peel it back. And I showed on last week's video when I did the sample board that there were some pieces taken out when I peeled it back to reveal it. That is, I believe, because the board wasn't completely dry. The paint wasn't completely dry when I went to reactivate it. And so part of, there were some pieces that came up with it. So that's why it's important to just make sure that it is dry completely. When you're done with these, store them paint side up while they're drying. And once they're dry, then you can put them back into the thing that they came in, which was basically the front and back, but it helps keep it protected. And just soak it down good. I pat it dry just to absorb some of the moisture. That way everything doesn't get soaking wet. If you start to peel it and it's feeling like it's not doing what you want it to do, like right there, it wasn't wet. So spray it again. Nice. All right, flip it to the other side. So it's now dry. I noticed when I was drying it that there was some bubbling up right in this area where the inlay was not adhering to the box. So while it was still wet, I just kind of used my finger and I pushed it down, and you can see now it's on there. So you just need to let it dry and it'll stick there. There are some lines on the side where you can see that are from the paint folding in the paper. If you don't like that, you can go ahead and take this is a 320, I think, sanding paper. A 220 is good enough. Don't use anything real rough, but you can just sand it, sand down those areas. I'm going to keep them because I like them, and they'll show up a little bit more in the next few steps here. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to set that aside, is I'm going to take the Vintage Textures, and this is the crecular, if that's how you say it. I'm not sure how it's said, honestly. The crackle, and I'm going to use the Stone Gray ink because I don't like real stark of the black. You could also do the white. It just depends on what you want it to look like. So I'm just gonna lightly set that on there, and I didn't center that at all. I'm just gonna tap it lightly. And you don't have to re-ink. You can just kind of go around in it as you do it. It'll be a little bit lighter as you go, and that gives a nice look too. So now I'm going to embellish it a little bit further, and I forgot I wanted to add some words in here too. So I'm going to use the Stone Gray again. You could do kindest regards on this, or whatever words, or you don't have to. You can do it your own way. But I'm just going to add. One thing I do have to say is make sure you're stamping the right direction. I can't tell you how many times where I thought I was stamping one direction and it turns out I wasn't. It was all upside down, and that was in a case where it mattered. So just pay attention to that. It doesn't matter on something like this, but that's looking very pretty. I like that. Once again, I'm still using the Stone Gray. I'm just going to go off the edge a little bit here. There we go. And then I will stamp on the box also, but I'm going to move on to what I'm planning to do next. And that is, I'm going to do a dragonfly. And I'm going to use embossing powder over the top of the dragonfly. This requires the stamp, some embossing powder, and either in the ink pad, it can be any kind of ink pad, or it can be an embossing ink, which is clear. And so there's no color to it. The embossing powder, for the most part, takes over the color of whatever you just stamped. But sometimes there will be a little bit of bleed through, which is kind of cool if you want to, like a two color effect. You can do it that way. You can do a color like this is a really just a gorgeous gold, but I think that's going to be a little more vibrant than I'm wanting. I want this to kind of be more on the funky side, so I'm thinking to use this copper and stamp it and emboss it with that. So I'm going to, and then you'll need a heat gun as well as the embossing powder. And it doesn't matter brands. You can, just if you have something, you can use that. I used to be a stamper back in the day, as far as doing embossing and stuff like that. I love doing that kind of stuff. I'd make cards. That was my downtime, my fun time. So I'm just lightly pressing on this. This is the dragonfly from, I want to say Rose Toil stamp. I'll lift it, and you can see there is an imprint. So while it's still wet, you're going to want to Oh, hopefully that's all dry. I can't tell. All my fingers have got, okay, ink on them. So hopefully, because if that's not completely dry, the embossing powder can stick to it. But I can show you a trick to that too. So you'll want a piece of paper to put the that didn't come out quite, the stamp didn't come out quite as good as I wanted it to. So I'm going to grab a paintbrush and I'm going to go ahead and brush it all off. It didn't take quite as clearly as I wanted it to. So I'm going to re-ink. And because I'm working with clear, it makes it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to pull this back. Sorry if my head's in the camera, but I want to be able to put it right over the top of my image again, which isn't sometimes so easy. So I'm pretty much getting in that area that, and what you could do is just let that embossing ink dry. If you're using the clear, that is the advantage of using the clear, is you can let it dry and then re-ink, and it won't matter. But oh yeah, that's much better. The other thing you can do is you could have it just slightly offset, where you do like the gold, you stamp it with the gold, and then you let that dry. You come back and just slightly offset it, and that would actually work probably pretty cool and give you kind of a little bit of a 3D effect. So I'm gonna pour a little bit more of this on there to get, it's okay, you can just pour, you can pour the whole bottle, because you're gonna just turn around and put it back in what you don't use. That's much better. Yeah, that's what I want. Can you see it? Am I in the camera frame? All right, so I'm going to grab the heat gun and then we will heat set this. So before I start, I'm going to put the embossing powder away, because as soon as you hit it, this would go everywhere. And I might use this again on the edges. I'm not quite sure yet. So just set that aside, put the lid on it. And then I've got my heat gun out. And this is going to make noise. I'm not going to turn it off for this part because I want you to see it. So I'm gonna, hopefully this doesn't go blurry. So my suggestion is do not hold it while you're drying it, because it does get hot, and keep it, you know, a little bit of a distance, because it is paper. But that being said, you know, embossing on paper is done all the time, but that looks pretty nice right there. So I think we're gonna move on to this, and we're gonna do kind of the same steps. So I went ahead and stamped some words, and I added just a smidge more of the crackle, and I crackled the bottom, and then I just added the dragonfly with the regular stone gray, just as an added little fun. You could do the same thing on the inside. And then I put the lid on, and you can see it's kind of like, well, that's really stark. So two things I want to do, and I'm trying to get the ink that I have built up on my hands off, is you could do a little bit of crackle along the edge here. So I should have still a little bit left on this. We'll see here. And I would do this not on the hat box. Not that it's going to matter a whole lot, but if you like what you got here, you may not want to be adding more. So I'm just going along and adding a little bit here and there randomly. There we go. All right, so that is the front of my box. So now I want to make it look a little bit older, a little funkier. So there's two ways you could do that. You could like add this, which is part of the vintage textures, and I'm not sure what this one's called. You know, you could stamp that along there, and then you could emboss it with the bronze to tie it in. I think I'm going to do it a little different. I could do it that way, but I think I'm going to do it with the embossing ink. And I'm just going to, and I'm going to leave it on the box just so that it has a little bit of rigidness. So I'm just going to go, well, actually I'm not, because then the embossing powder is probably going to go inside the box. So I'm just going to take the embossing powder and I'm just going to randomly, funkily hit the edges. And you don't want it to necessarily, you know, get some on the underside, get some on the top. Just do not be consistent. Just, you know, you want it to be kind of funky. And you want to make sure you're building up all your all your layers before you wax it. That being said, if you think you are going to want to add stuff, you can not wax it, and you could just do a clear coat. Then you could continue to build up your layers. I'm probably going to wax it because I like the added dimension that wax gives it. So I'm taking the powder again, and I may have to do this in sections because I may not have enough powder to get all the way around. We'll see. And then I'm also, don't forget the sides here. So I'm going to dump it out, and always tap it a little bit. Get the extra off. And you can see that's leaving a cool effect there. So now I'm just going to in the powder to get my sides. So you can just kind of roll it in there or tap it in there. And see, you can see it's chunky there. That's probably just from my, yeah, see it's starting to fall off. So once again, tap it. If you don't like what you're seeing as far as it, maybe it's a little too heavy, maybe you don't want these, just take your paintbrush, get in there, and just wipe it down a little bit. So I'm where I want to be with this, and so I'm going to go ahead and wax it now. When you're heating this up, it does kind of have a tendency to kind of maybe misshape it. What you can do is, while it's cooling, tip it upside down with the lid on. It is warm. Handle it carefully. Handle your heat gun carefully. No burning yourselves. That's a no-no. Put something on top of this, upside down, like a book, and that will help while it's cooling. So I'm going to go ahead and wax it, and I'm just using DIY's clear wax. And this will change the overall feel of it. And you can see it will come back. You know, you can see that some of the stuff like this stamp here, it looks like it's disappearing. It's not. As this dries, it'll reappear. So now, a lot of you probably know, if you watch my videos, that I love to do the DIY decrepit dust on things. So you could do that instead of the embossing here. But I might just add a little bit of the decrepit dust to this. Got a paintbrush here. I like to just put a little bit on the table. I can find my tool, because I don't like to waste. And you can always add more. So I'm just going to take my paintbrush, and because the wax is still wet, you can come in here. Now, I don't think I got enough wax right there. Now that I see it. All right. And just add. Doesn't have to be a lot. Just want to funky up this edge a little bit. Like I said, you can do that on this edge also, instead of the embossing. It just kind of makes it look old. You want it to look good when the lid's not on it too, just in case somebody wants to use it to put something in like flowers or do a table arrangement. So you can see I'm just kind of adding it. It doesn't have to necessarily make a ton of sense. It's just, you know, when people handle things and their hands are a little on the dirty side, you know, around the edges is where things would get dirty faster. So I like to put, nice thing too is it's kind of toning down that that darker the crackle. I'm going to do the same thing here, and I might add just a little bit in here around the edges, even though I've got the copper. I want to just kind of tone down these flowers a smidge. Make them look a little bit more old-fashioned. I think we're there. You could also, you know, put a bow around it, you know, embellish it however you feel you want to embellish it. This is just a good start to doing a project. You can take part of what I've showed you here and use it on something, or you can do the whole thing. But make it yours. Do it your way. I had to do one more. Just had to do one more. There we go. Okay, now I'm stopping. So thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions about any of these products, you can go to my website at www.boutiquepaint.com. Thanks. Bye.